Welcome to our special coverage here on NDTV Profit, where we're talking about Budget 2024 being the year of the takeoff. It's a theme that is being recognized the world over and not just in India. Our path to move towards a developed nation is progressing quickly, and a very, very big role will be played by industry. I have the opportunity today to speak with the top brass of the CII. I'm speaking today with Mr. R. Dinesh, the CII President, Mr. Sanjiv Puri, the CII President Designate, and Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, DG of CII, to talk about what they expect from Budget 2024. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for speaking with us here on NDTV Profit. Let me take the first question to the CII President, Mr. R. Dinesh. Technically, this is an interim budget, a vote on account, but if past precedent, especially in 2019, has taught us anything, is to expect anything and not underestimate what you see. Having said that, there is an extensive wish list that the CII has put in place. My question is, how much of this will help prod private capex, which relatively is still lagging?
So thank you. And if you really look at it, I think India, as you said, is in a very sweet spot. And both from opportunity from the geopolitical side and as well as from the economic growth perspective. And I think that's something which I would call it as a great position to be in. So in that background, you actually see industries who are I would call it very positive about the future and the way in which the future is going to evolve. If you look at the various CII surveys which we have been having, all of it is coming through as to the growth prospects being very high. But having said that, let us not forget that we are in the midst of a very strong, I would call it, uncertain geopolitical world. Therefore, if you talk about capex for domestic use, for the necessity for the growth which is taking place in India, that's very much happening, and I would say that's where you see significant capacity utilization taking place, cutting across all sectors. And therefore, I do believe that the current growth rates which you're speaking of in excess of 7% is something which is going to mean even more capex, or rather the utilization of this capacity being used up, and therefore the need to get significant capex coming in from a private sector perspective. And the final point is overseas investments into India is also seeing a big uptick, which is also part of this growth pattern which we are speaking of.
Absolutely. Mr. Banerjee, let me take that point to you. And yes, we are hearing and reporting constantly, and we cover stock markets, so at least in the listed space, you have this conversation about more and more private capex, more utilization improving, although the RBI says it's still sub 75%, which is a bit of a concern. What about in the unlisted space? What about in the MSME space? Is there a bit of push required to actually get those investments going? Yes, that question for you.
It's an important question, because what we really today, thank you, Tamanna. What's going to be important today is to see how the small and mid-sized companies, which are going to be very, very critical, are able to access liquidity, which much of it may not be in the ambit of the budget, but important for them is to see to it, for us to see to it that MSME sector have availability of liquidities. Second, what's very, very, very critical is to see how we are able, one of the things, easy things to be done for them is to really ensure payments on time for them, which itself helps a lot. The third area that I would see coming up for the MSME is, yes, a little bit of incentivization for them, because from that sector would come in employment, from that sector would be, the number of trade agreements that you see that India has been able to enter. They are going to be a very critical part in taking and leveraging those trade agreements to enhance our exports. So facilitation for the MSME sector is going to be very, very critical, as we are looking at a growth rate for India which is going to be 7% plus over periods of time, and that support would be, number one, essential, but to support them would be absolutely much more essential so that they are able to expand and put in, as you said, fresh investments as we go along.
Absolutely, and we'll take that question to Mr. Puri as well in just a bit, but quick follow-up there from Mr. R. Dinesh in terms of some of the key pointers that the CII has put together in its wish list. And what I found interesting is on the GST structure, though not necessarily within the ambit of what the union government can do. But I just want you to explain why you thought it's interesting or important to move to a 3-rate GST structure, split into essential, standard, and luxury/demerit goods. Would you say that even as GST collections have been very buoyant, some of the problems or hurdles of implementation from a corporate view still need to be ironed out?
So if you look at it, I think it's, I think people have now got settled down to using GST, and that's something which is very clear. And if you speak especially to the medium and small scale enterprises who have all become, so to say, now utilizing this digital method of making GST payments, the feedback we have got is that the complexity is because of the different tiers, and I would call it the different layers within which the GST mechanism is being monitored. Therefore, the simple focus is to get this 3-tier structure, which will then enable easy usage, and also I would call it remove all the ambiguities, which is what I think has actually had been issues with the GST system. But if you look at it today, I don't think that there is any need to tinker with the system in itself. It is the 3 tiers which we are recommending, which will make the difference from making it very easy for people to use and utilize.
Yeah. Let me come to Mr. Sanjiv Puri, you are President Designate, and I think you will be taking the reins, Mr. Puri, at a very interesting time for India, where on the face of it, we are reaching new heights, Mr. Puri. We're growing at a great clip. Your discretionary consumption is fantastic, but there are concerns about consumption at the bottom of the pyramid. I want to start with your perspective on this question, and I'm sure this is something you're seeing, Mr. Puri, where your luxury hotels are selling out, but then your base sort of products, are you seeing a slowdown there? Is rural slowdown or consumption something you think this budget should at least directionally address?
Okay, let me start by saying I think the focus of the government through various policy instruments, through the budgets, has been on sustainable and inclusive development, and that's visible in multiple dimensions. And if you look at the various indices, they're all moving forward, and we've actually seen some good path-breaking stuff happen over several years in the past, and that's why the economy is doing so well. But the reality is that, we've all been challenged by COVID, and then the challenges of the geopolitical situation, which created enormous amount of inflation in the economy. And we're also faced with climate emergency on account of the excessive emissions in the developed economies. And all this puts its stress in the economy, in pockets of the economy. And that's why in some pockets we're seeing that the progress is not as much as in other pockets. And rural is one area, I think you're right, that and the government is already focusing on it, but this is an area where I think perhaps more could be done. More could be done by way of rural infrastructure, improving resilience of agriculture through better coverage of irrigation, to collectively in a public-private partnership working together through what we call as the climate smart agriculture to build resilience. There are also opportunities opening up through the new policy reform on leasing, forest land to private sector to create productive capacity. And today, because of the growth of certain sectors like, say, the real estate, India is actually having to import more amount of wood. So if once this is enforced with an economic model, that will immediately create employment. And these are some of the enablers, I would say, already in place. We need to progress that, and maybe in certain areas press the pedal a little more, and ultimately I think we will get the kind of results that are anticipated.
True, Mr. Puri, but the concern or the spoiler seems to be things like patchy rainfall, something which we experienced last year. It contributes to rural distress, and then of course there are many other factors. What can the government do to mitigate this in terms of a policy direction and address issues like unemployment in a more cohesive fashion?
So, that's what I alluded to in my response. I said as far as the weather events are concerned, which have a disproportionate impact on the agricultural value chains, and we have to really continue the path that the government is taking, and perhaps do more there in a spirit of public-private partnership. All of us need to come together. It's about improving penetration of irrigation. It's disseminating the information on weather and educating farmers on the practices comprehensively, over a period of time, bringing in climate-smart agriculture, the R&D to build resilience in the agri-value chains. I think these are the things that need to be done. Rainwater harvesting, amongst others. These are issues that are already being addressed through various policy interventions. I think collectively we need to come together and perhaps see how we can make faster progress on it. That's really the point I'm making. As far as employment is concerned, I think, again, we must keep in mind that many indices on the positive track. Even if you look at the women participation rate in labor, that is also on an upward track. Yes, but India does have a lot more youth. So we do need to strengthen incomes in the farm area. We do need to create other opportunities. And I think the focus through PLI to make India into a manufacturing hub, to also, revitalize certain industries that have high employment multipliers, like the toys and textiles. I think these are the areas that will provide value. And to support this, CII has also suggested some kind of an, employment-linked incentive. So that provides an impetus to industry that is a large employer.
One of the things that did catch my eye is the CII recommendation to better target subsidies for food and fertilizer, and that sort of links to what we're talking about, rural distress or any kind of pain points. So 90% of subsidies are targeted for food and fertilizer. The food subsidy specifically has been going on since COVID times. Would you say it's time to relook at the parameters of where it's targeted?
I think the larger point is that better targeting will bring in efficiencies, and better instruments of targeting also will bring in efficiencies. I think the government has very, very wisely used the digital infrastructure to actually do direct benefit transfer, for example. So it's more about, sharper targeting and better instruments to provide that support to those who need it. And we completely, CII completely supports this fact that these welfare measures need to happen and need to be strengthened as we go along. But the idea is really to target it more sharply and move more towards direct benefit transfer.
Right. Target more sharply, move more towards direct benefit transfer. I'll come back to you, Mr. Puri, but I want to take off from what you said on the PLI scheme, and I'll come to Mr. Dinesh on it. We have, I think, 1.5 to 2 years now of actual implementation and play out of the PLI scheme since it was announced. So we have some idea of how it's working out. I want to get your assessment. Has the PLI scheme been a hit at this point, or ways to go? How can there be more incentive and more improvement? Because remember, the end goal is to become more Atmanirbhar and incentivize companies to get into production which might not seem too appealing on the face of it.
So it's a very good question, and if you look at it, I believe the PLI scheme has been very successful for 3-4 reasons. I think people are, first of all, India has obviously become the cynosure of most companies to look at, one for its domestic market, and secondly with this focus on the infrastructure and the cost of doing business, its own competitiveness. Therefore, in that background, I think the PLI scheme is like adding, I would call it the sweetener for people to come in and start investing in India. In that background, that this has been successful. The second issue is that what do we see as action at the ground? And if you look at it, I think there have been, these are all, I would call it, big decisions for people to make, especially considering that they have been integrated into very many global value chains across the world. And therefore, I think it's very difficult to take a decision or take a view from a 1 or 2 year period. So our view is that at least it should actually be extended, and there is a greater opportunity to attract even more investments to come in, not just from overseas companies, but also Indian companies who wish to participate and become part of this global value chains. Therefore, in my view, the scheme has been quite successful. It needs to be further continued, and this will create a large opportunity for both global and Indian companies to invest in India and become part of global value chains. And of course, the point which Sanjiv mentioned of generating employment is also a core focus.
Absolutely. Mr. Puri, just a quick take on the PLI scheme, and what are the kind of sectors you would like to see added to the bucket?
So, if you look at, there are two aspects to it, and maybe let me first finish the employment generation side of it, because Sanjiv alluded to it. And that is the employment-linked incentive. What we are basically saying is that ultimately manufacturing is going to be about becoming, as I said, for the domestic market and global. But for a short term and to make it more cost competitive, we will need to focus on the employment generation sectors. So for example, logistics, for example, tourism, for example, health. All of these are sectors where you're going to see significant improvement in job creation. Therefore, one focus area is to look at those sectors where there is going to be significant employment generation, and that's something which CII is looking at as areas of immediate focus.
Sure.
If you look at the new sectors within manufacturing, there is toys. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no, absolutely. I just wanted to get a quick view from Mr. Puri on it as well. I don't know if he can hear me. On the PLI point of it, Mr. Puri, the focus so far has been on sectors to fill the gap. So we realized in COVID we need to make APIs locally. We're doing that. We realized after the semiconductor crisis that we better get onto the act and make our own. What do you think we need to add to that list now?
So I think Dinesh has kind of covered all the areas that need to be additionally looked at. These are all areas that have high index to employment, whether it's areas like tourism or whether it's areas like toys, amongst others. So nothing more to add from my perspective.
Okay. Mr. Banerjee, I wanted to come to one bit which I found interesting in the wish list from CII, and it's in the MSME segment and contextualized with female labor participation rate, which we want to increase to 50%. You say that there should be 12 weeks of sort of subsidies given to MSMEs because by law, women are now entitled to 6 months maternity benefit. I suppose that is the context of this. Can you explain this? And is it because you are seeing a hesitation to hire women because of this benefit?
No, I would not say that it's because of any hesitation to hire women, but we would like, one of the big areas of success in India, if I would see, is the way in the last few years, focus have been given for higher involvement of women in the labor force, and making it the 50% of our possible workforce to be better engaged and more engaged. Much of the schemes that we have seen, the ecosystems which has been created, much have been created towards, directed towards the welfare of women in our country. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details, but that's the background when you look at cleaner fuels to everything. So much that has been done. But now it's time, and we have we have developed in the country. If you see, if you really look at the number of the 48% of our STEM graduates are women. So there are some very good numbers coming out now. Now, how do we utilize that in our workforce? And there is so much of scope for that. And if you see even women in manufacturing, I see that the engagement of women in manufacturing, be it heavy machinery, companies, that's increasing very strongly. So in different types of segments of we see women employment increasing. Now we need to increase that further, facilitate that further, and whatever there are in terms of inhibitors, that being removed. Now I want to draw an example. When India started focusing through a policy ecosystem on CSR, the 2% CSR that came in, we saw how the private sector followed and getting more and more engaged into CSR. Now here there are certain policy enablers that we are really looking at, which will help more women. Say, for instance, like what you said, maternity leave or pay parity, pledging towards a pay parity by companies, or even looking at how they develop creches. This is where we will find more and more women being able to contribute to any segment, and the special segment could be MSME, where clusters of such could be developed, facilities which could be developed, and that would really help more women participation, and that would be even help us fuel the type of growth rate that we are aspiring for.
Right. Just one last point before I let you go, gentlemen, and I'll take this to Mr. Puri. It's about the taxpayer or the salaried taxpayer, because if we want to drive consumption not just at the bottom of the pyramid but throughout, do you think it's important to now give relief and incentivize this segment as well, especially if we want to push a better manufacturing and consumption?
Now, I think certainly there is a merit in considering some relief to people at the lower end of the tax brackets. I think that would spur consumption and in turn aid the virtuous cycle that is already prevailing in the economy.
So a lot on the plate as far as CII is concerned. It is a big occasion to understand the policy push of the government one way or the other. In a pre-election budget, that also becomes important to understand what the vision is going forward. And here is what the industry wants. Industry, of course, backbone of that entire dream of moving to a developed nation for India. And it is one segment of the economy that needs to fire. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today on our budget takeoff special, and hope to hear from you soon after the budget.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was the top brass of the CII on their expectations from the budget. The list of what industry wants is not very long, because a lot of their expectations do get fulfilled outside of the quorum of the budget. But it's important for private capex now to push on at a time when maybe government capex will have to take a bit of a setback.